so glad to have him tonight. He recently retired from a career in education, which began in 1956. He served as professor and also administrator at Tri-State University from 1973 to 2005. He has a doctorate in history from the University of Illinois. He's the author of several articles. His current focus is on archiving the personal papers of General Lewis Blaine Hershey, Steuben County native and director of selective service under Roosevelt, Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon. Hershey's papers were given to Tri-State by Gilbert, his eldest son. So we are so glad to have Dr. Zimmerman with us tonight.
Thank you, Mary. I last appeared before the Historical Society 30 years ago with my colleague Don Zimmer, and I think at that time we volunteered. With a wife on the board here at the Historical Society, I dare say this time I was drafted, which brings us to the subject of Lewis Hershey. When Cyrus Klein left this home in 1909 to represent Northeast Indiana in the Congress, growing up in Steuben County was Lewis Blaine Hershey and Ellen Dygert. Now, teenagers at that time didn't use the phone like they do today. They kept in touch with letter and card. I'm being signaled to raise my voice, and I'm sorry, folks, but this time of the year when it starts to turn cold, I have a problem with a husky voice, as some of you in the front row can tell. And so I'll do my best, but it may be a little bit too soft for some of you. Well, why don't you just go ahead and nod off? I'm accustomed to that. My Tri-State students feel free to do that regularly. Well, anyway, as Mary's introduction suggested, I've had an opportunity to look into General Hershey's personal papers that were donated to the university. I'm supposed to be archiving them. That means getting them ready for public viewing. But being the historian, of course, that's going along slowly because we would rather read than archive. And so what I'm here to do tonight is to talk to you about General Hershey and his good friend Ellen Dygert and their correspondence when teenagers growing up here in Steuben County. Now, I suspect no one needs to have a refresher, but well, Lewis Hershey was, as you know, in the military, maybe some of you know, in the military from 1911 when he joined what he called the militia here at Steuben County until 1973. He transferred from the National Guard after following World War I into the regular Army, and eventually will rise to the rank of four-star general. I think he's the only four-star general in the history of the United States who never saw combat, except possibly a little down on the Mexican border when the Guard was sent down there. I would place Hershey on the list of the 10 most prominent Hoosiers in the 20th century. What earns him that distinction, in my opinion, is the role that he played in military manpower, fulfilling the military manpower needs of the United States during World War II, as well as the Korean and Vietnam War. As an expert in military manpower needs, and manpower needs in general, Hershey appeared frequently in the national press and on television programs such as Meet the Press when television came along in the late 40s. And he was a much sought after public speaker. Lewis Hershey was born here, Steuben County, September 12, 1893, in his parents' farm home, which is located on, I hope you can visualize the county, some of you. It was located on County Road 500. The farm home sat just west of Interstate I-69. Latta Hershey, his father, farmed the land north to the Otter Lakes. Much of that farm today is now the Beechwood Acres site, an acre site. When older son Russell took over the farm in 1909, Latta Hershey then acquired a second farm, which is located approximately at the entrance of the Pokakegan State Park. When you go down 127 North Wayne Street and reach the stoplight there and go under the underpass, you're going through Latta Hershey's house. Say hello. Practically all of that farm is now Interstate I-69. By the way, in Dr. Cameron's library, on the desk there I have a little display, and part of that display is a scrapbook which contains a story about General Hershey that appeared in the Indianapolis Star, ironically 8 days before Pearl Harbor. And they're talking about this Hoosier who's been named director of the Selective Service, and they show a picture of the farm. It's a very small picture. You'll need a magnifying glass. And close to it is another picture. It happens to be very small. You'll need a magnifying glass, but that is a picture of the second Latta Hershey farm. Lewis Hershey's roots in Steuben County are very deep. His parents were born here in Steuben County, and his grandparents came here as pioneers from New York in the 1840s. His paternal roots are Mennonite. His paternal roots go to a Swiss Mennonite named Hershey, H-E-R-S-C-H-E is how it was spelled, who came to eastern Pennsylvania in the early 1700s. And by the way, that chocolate that we all like to eat came from the same Hershey Mennonite. Although Lewis Hershey and the Hershey chocolates are not directly related. His maternal roots are Richardson and Hutchins. He was named after grandfather Lewis Richardson. And the middle name Blaine was suggested by grandfather Hershey. Blaine is James G. Blaine, who was the Republican candidate for president in 1884, not successful, and then became the Secretary of State under Hoosier President William Henry Harrison, and who died just shortly before Lewis Hershey was born. And so grandfather Hershey said, call him Blaine, middle name Blaine. Hershey's mother passed away on Valentine's Day, February 14, 1898. So he was between the ages of 4 and 5. The only memory that he has of his mother is of a sick woman who lay in bed. She died of tuberculosis. And so he was raised by his father, with whom he developed a very close association. Latta Hershey, father's name was Latta, was a Republican activist who served in Jamestown as their assessor and also as their trustee. And then from 1913 to 1917, he was the county sheriff here in Steuben County. And so when assessor, Lewis helped his father do calculations, and a major part of the assessor's job. And farmers had a difficult time knowing exactly where their property was in those days. And when sheriff, Latta made Lewis, then a tri-state student, his deputy. Helping raise Lewis was Alma Richardson, Latta's sister-in-law, and I suspect that on her deathbed probably the sister indicated to the dying sister that she would raise her son. In any event, Alma Richardson was brought into the household and served as a domestic for Latta Hershey for the rest of his life, which went to 1938. And then she died in 1960 while a resident south of the tri-state campus in that area. Hershey's boyhood home was full of people. His grandparents lived there until their deaths. Latta sometimes boarded men who logged the woods. Elementary school teacher sometimes boarded at the Hershey farmhouse. Ellen Dygert was also the daughter of farmers, the daughter of George and Emily Dygert, who lived in York Township, the township that borders the Ohio state line. She married Lewis in 1917. They ran off the Mississippi, Mary and Marion. Yeah, they ran off the Mississippi and got married. Actually, he was there. It was part of his duty in the National Guard. And Ellen at the time was studying nursing at Cook County Hospital. She had worked for a doctor here and decided she wanted to be a nurse. And they had a strict prohibition against nurse trainees being married. So secretly she went off to Mississippi to get married. They were married for 60 years, 1917 to 1977, and they died within weeks of each other in 1977. Ellen's tombstone says that with reference to her husband, wife of 60 years, friend and counselor for 70. So they knew each other for quite some time. They shared for a time schooling in Fremont. Ellen, her last grades there, though she was actually 1 year older than Lewis, she was 2 years behind him in school. And I don't know for sure why that is, but I think it had something to do with the way people ran their houses that day, not with her intellect. Maybe with his, because he did tend to, he was hurried along in school, as I'll point out later. To his great disappointment, Ellen's parents sent her to Angola High School instead of Fremont High School. So tonight's presentation is going to be about teenagers, Ellen Dygert and Lewis Blaine Hershey. And it's family rated. I'm not going to be talking about drugs and alcohol because there's really no mention of drugs and alcohol in the letters that I read. And Hershey's biographer maintains that he was teetotaler, at least in the beginning, though later in life he became an occasional social drinker. Maybe some of you who know Hershey can confirm or not that particular point. Actually, he was a little quirky. He was a vegetarian in early life, much to Ellen's chagrin. She hated it, especially when they went out and ate in public. But later he gave that up. So there won't be any talk about drugs and drinking because there's none in the letters. Now, with reference to sex, well, there's no explicit sexual information in the letters either. And so I won't be talking about that subject, although I could maybe elaborate on it a bit in the question and answer session. So if any of you are disappointed, the subjects are going to be kind of dry, and so you may well nod off as we go on. Well, let's start where the day began on a farm, and that is with the call from Dad to begin with daily chores. Some of you probably recognize that. Work for teenager Lewis Hershey meant daily chores, field work, gardening, fruit picking, and serving as a construction assistant. All of this, of course, without pay. In later life, General Hershey recalled that his first job for pay was picking strawberries at a patch about a half mile from his home. He picked 10 quarts for 1 cent a quart, but lost the job when the owner concluded that he had eaten more than he put in the basket and also dragged his feet too much over the vines. His first real for pay job began on his 17th birthday when Lewis Hershey started his job as teacher at the Dewey Elementary School, which is located in Jamestown. Incidentally, there will be some pictures of teacher Hershey and his students in the Cameron Library as well. Graduating from Fremont High School at 16, he came to Tri-State for 12 weeks, summer course. That qualified him to teach elementary school, and so there he is, teaching. His contract, by the way, his first contract is laying in there as well. He got $2.25 a day pay for teaching. Latter, Hershey divided daily chores. He milked the cows, something Lewis hated, and Russell, the older brother, took care of the horses. Latta first assigned Lewis to caring for small sheep, especially the lambs who lost their mother and had to be fed by bottle. And later he added feeding hogs and young cattle big enough to eat grain as to the two Lewis's assignments. Moreover, with dogs Frantic and Nellie, Lewis drove the cattle to the fields when milking and feeding were complete. Field assignments included the full array: plowing, cultivating, threshing, making hay. On June 24, 1908, for example, Lewis wrote to friend Ellen, quote, "Plowed corn on Monday and Tuesday until the wind began to blow," close quote. Being a small-town boy but not a farmer, I don't know what that means or why you stop plowing when the wind blows. Maybe some farmer will explain that to us in the discussion section. As a construction hand, he helped, quote, "put planks on that bridge down north of the schoolhouse," close quote. The schoolhouse was located a little over 200 yards east of his home. That's where he received his elementary education. The bridge served as an overpass to a creek, which preteen Hershey used for swimming. He later in life recalled swimming there with the permission of his father, and how the bridge served as a cover when he heard approaching horses and wagons. Boy Hershey swam nude. What boy didn't in a creek growing up? Other construction projects, by the way, I also understand that in early Steuben County history that farmers sometimes in lieu of taxes, or at least in part of their taxes, would do road work. And it's well may be that Latta Hershey was fixing that bridge to get a little break on his taxes. Don't know that, I haven't verified that, but that's a possibility. Other construction projects identified in the letters were the building of a barn, and if you go out there, you see that barn. I'm pretty certain it's original. And the construction of a cider mill. And for that cider mill, Hershey picked apples in late August. And of course, when apple picking was done in September, Lewis went to school. Latta first enrolled Lewis Blaine Hershey in school in March 1899 when Lewis was 5.5 years old. The school he attended was called Hell's Point, though its formal name was Pleasant School. And the school was located on a small peninsula which jutted into a marshy area, an area which is mostly covered by I-69. If you go out to the farm, to Beechwood, the acre side, and walk the trails out there, you'll see evidence of that marshy area. Lewis graduated from the Hells Point School at age 12 with straight 100s on his last report card, save for deportment, where Miss Rogers marked him down to 99. She must have wanted to send a message. Too young, according to county requirements, to attend high school, he was admitted to Fremont High School, nevertheless, after passing a test. I got to tell you, Lewis received a marvelous education at Fremont High School, where the curriculum focused on classical liberal arts. Lewis had 3 years of Latin, 2 years of algebra, 1.5 years of geometry, 4 years of English, 3 years of history. He also studied bookkeeping, commercial arithmetic, and physical geography. In Latin, Hershey read Cicero and Caesar. In English, he read Shakespeare. He described the reading of Shakespeare's Twelfth Night this way: each student had a part to read, and he was Sir Toby Belch. Now, to remind you, Toby was known for rowdy behavior, practical jokes, heavy drinking, and late-night carousing. Did the teacher typecast Lewis? Perhaps. He was guilty of 3 of the 4. Here's an example of rowdy behavior. In English class, his tablet, which laid on the windowsill, incidentally, that school was recently raised up there in Fremont along Coldwater Road, blew out onto the ground. That led to Baker's pencil being thrown out along with some chalk. He and Zeke did the throwing, but eventually Miss Dogood restored order when she, quote, threatened to send every one of us to the HS room, end of quote. I assume that's the discipline room. Fremont teachers expected work at school and at home. And these quotes verify that. Quote, writing a debate, close quote. Quote, studying geometry this evening, close quote. Quote, staying home Sunday and reading, close quote. Now, while the classes were formal, for the most part, there were discussions of issues of the day. Today, our history class held a great discussion about Catholicism. Bess, Miss Dogood, and I stood up for it, and Zeke and Burl stood against it, close quote. Well, that was a great issue. This was the decade of the new immigrant, the immigrant coming in from Southern and Eastern Europe who was more Catholic and more Jewish than the Protestant Old Stock Americans, and many Protestant Old Stock Americans worried. That was an issue. And the Fremont High School teacher brought it into the classroom. High school for Lewis Hershey involved extracurricular activities as well. He was a debater, an actor, a basketball player, a literary society president, a class president. He debated at the Congregational Church before the Fremont Literary Society. As actor, he informed Ellen that, quote, we practiced the play every night this week, close quote. His basketball team played in the fall months on an outdoor court, no indoor gym at Fremont. And when matched against Angola High School, which Ellen attended, Lewis lowered expectations in advance of the game with this excuse, quote, your team practices right along while we don't practice at all. And besides, your boys are used to a hall, while ours have not played in one this year, close quote. By the way, one of his teammates was Lee Cassell, who could be familiar to some of you. A tragic story connected with Lee Cassell. He died in World War I on Armistice Day, November 11, 1918. When not playing basketball, debating, Lewis Hershey presided over the Emersonian Society. It gave programs once a month, which consisted of essays, orations, and recitations. When one of those activities was a program that was held at the Fremont Opera House on February 22nd, 1909. It's definitely not surprising to me that Lewis Hershey was a much sought-off speaker. I mean, he got it he got a basic foundation. And I've read some of those speeches, and the evidence of that liberal arts training is very clear in his speeches. In the 1960s, he wrote a letter to his high school English teacher, who was then a very senior lady, thanking her for all that she had done and telling her that he still carried the copy of Shakespeare, which she had recommended that he have. Now, aside from work on the farm and school, did teenagers have any time for recreation? They sure did. It will not surprise you to learn that swimming, fishing, and going to the lakes headed the summer list. Lewis used Little Otter Lake for swimming and fishing. He swam across Little Otter. First time over deep water that summer on June 7, 1909, he informed Ellen. Following week, he caught a few red eyes and a bullhead, about 18 in all. On the weekend of June 2021, he and some of the boys, quote, went back to the old house by the lake and cooked our dinner, close quote, after swimming and fishing. Lewis also played on the Hells Point baseball team. You know, Hells Point was a region at the time. I suspect it's the region that served that school. I know there are all kinds of stories about what is Hells Point going on as I speak. Lewis Hershey had a version, but you know, his Hoosier wit is so deep, you've got to be always suspect. But he once told a story about, well, it's Hells Point because that school was on a peninsula. And a revivalist came once and held a revival, and he got so few recruits that he called it Hell's Point. But Lewis Hershey would identify himself as being from Hells Point, Indiana, in later life. So he played on the Hells Point baseball team. Now, playing baseball on Sunday, however, posed a conflict. For realistically, it was the only day that a farm boy had available. But that playing of baseball came at that time still into conflict with that religious conviction which said, that Sundays was not for that kind of activity. "You do not object to me playing ball on Sunday, do you?" He wrote to Ellen, and it wasn't a question of not doing other things with Ellen, but it was clear that the context was clear that he was concerned that that might bother her. Something Ellen could agree with was attending a dance. The Lewis-Ellen letter suggested dancing was extremely popular, and dances were not confined to weekends. Teenage Lewis Hershey could not pass up a dance, even if, quote, "dearest," close quote, which is how he addressed Ellen in the letters, was not available. Though going with someone other than Ellen had to be explained, of course. On January 21, 1909, Lewis's junior year at Fremont, Ellen's freshman year here in Angola, he wrote that he had gone to a dance last Monday evening with Lana. But he had good reason, for the girls paid. And that was an opportunity he couldn't forego. He assured Ellen that do-good took her home, and by way of further explanation reminded Ellen that he had permitted her to go to a dance the previous year. Well, when Ellen nevertheless objected, Lewis said that he would forego going to the next one because no one went to a dance without a partner. Well, Lewis's enthusiasm for dancing permitted him to chance Ellen's concerns one more time. In late March, he acknowledged going to a dance, this time taking Lala. Yes, there was a girl at Fremont with the name of Lala. When not dancing, the young couples came together at parties. By postal card, Florence Carmody invited Lewis and Ellen to a party in February of 1909. In one of the few references to the telephone, she replied in her card back or letter that she would telephone him. I suspect she was here in town boarding at Grandma's and had to wait till she got home to get permission. Was there any time left over for religion? Yes, for Lewis did attend Sunday school on December 8, 1909, pointing out to Ellen that he had not been there for some time, but speculated that he would go again. The letters suggest that Ellen attended school regularly, and Hershey's biographer, George Flynn, indicates that probably of the two, Ellen was definitely the more regular churchgoer. Lewis did attend church, but not as regularly. When is a boy a man? I ask this a rhetorical question, for I want to shift now to the subject of parental discipline. In later life, Lewis Hershey had this to say on the subject of adulthood, quote, "A boy becomes an adult 3 years before his parents think he does, and about 2 years after he thinks he does." You mathematicians can probably put that together and see a gap of 5 years. For parents in that era, just before the automobile, the problem was how tolerant to be of late hours, given that travel by horse was slow, especially on snow-laden roads. Out of sight, but not out of mind was a big problem. Further complicating the out of sight, but not out of mind syndrome was that children of farmers who attended high school, and they were in the minority, often boarded with relatives in town. As an Angola high school student, Ellen stayed at Grandma's on the 500 block of Southwest Street. Little house there on the corner is where her grandmother lived. Lewis was a horse. Lewis Hershey was a commuter. He did ride the horse in and boarded at a barn at Uncle Jim's, and apparently would ride back. But he also stayed at Uncle Jim's. Weather conditions probably required that. And for a time between farms, the Hersheys lived in Fremont, in fact, right across the street from the school. And so Hershey just had to walk across the street to get to school. Lada Hershey's tolerance for late hours was mixed. In May 1908, Lewis informed Ellen that he had gone home by way of Fremont, York Township, Fremont, Hills Point. He reached home at 2. that's 2 a.m., and acknowledged that he nearly ran into another buggy and that he had, quote, slept some of the way, close quote. When he passed Fremont, the clock at the post office read 12:15. So you had another 5.5 miles to go about. No comment on Dad's response, but on another, he informed Ellen that while nothing had been said about his whereabouts that night, the next morning, his dad made note of the Pigeon Creek blue clay on the buggy wheels. Now, how'd that gotten there? Lewis didn't know. His limit was Fremont. And those of you who know Steuben County geography know that from Hell's Point to York Township, you're going to cross Pigeon Creek. In June, Lewis wrote that his father had shrugged off a 3:30 a.m. arrival by sarcastically speculating that morning on whether it was worth Lewis's having gone to bed. In late July, however, Lewis confessed that he received a scolding on arriving home so late. So transportation was slow and therefore a problem for a young gent wanting to spend time with his girl. In the pre-auto age, teenagers were limited to walking, riding a horse, riding in a buggy or sleigh, traveling by train, and if they were around Lake James, by lake boat. As an example of walking, on July 9th, 1908, Lewis wrote that he'd gotten home all right Saturday night, stumbled over about 1,000 stumps in the woods, though. I have no idea where he was, but obviously he didn't take the roads. He went across the fields and paid for it. In the summer of 1910, while attending Tri-State, Lewis walked home on weekends from his Park Street boarding house, the white house on Park Street that's a block and a half east of the campus, just next to those apartment buildings. There's where he boarded. So he walked home on weekends, which is, about a distance of about 5 miles. After playing a Sunday ball game in Jamestown one weekend, friend Eckert took him by buggy to Lone Tree Point, where Lewis boarded a lake boat for Paltytown, southern shore of Lake James, and from there took the train into Angola. And that train had been there probably by that time, maybe 4 or 5 years. And I assume some of you are aware there was a train once that linked Angola with Paltytown and Lake James. In the wintertime, sleighs and sleds were used. I had a fine sleigh ride, the first one of the season, Lewis wrote, about a week before Christmas, December 1907. On January 23, 1909, Lewis's father took him to Fremont in a bobsled. Elsie Colville and Ford Folk rode with them, probably taking them to school. Brother Russ took Lewis to Fremont in early February. They left at 6:30 and arrived at about 8:30 or 9. I don't know why he equivocated, but that's how it is in the letter. Hour and a half or 2.5 hours. There had not been a team over the road until about a half mile from town, is how he put it. So it was pretty slow going that night. Now, in some cases, teenagers had the use of the train. The train, for example, got Ellen from Angola to Fremont for a quick visit with Lewis one evening. Boarding, as I said, with Grandma, and without notice, Ellen caught a late afternoon train to Fremont, spent close to an hour with Lewis, then caught an evening train from Fremont to Angola, slipped back in the house, and Grandma didn't say anything. Which probably explains that Grandma probably didn't pay too much attention to Ellen. if she hadn't noticed it, she'd skip dinner. Transportation also had its hazards. In George Flynn's biography, he reveals this story. A few weeks after graduating from high school, Lewis took Ellen in the family rig for a ride. With Ellen sitting on his lap, he decided to race the rig. What young guy wouldn't want to do that? His sharp blow with the whip caused the horse to bolt, separating the harness, causing the rig to turn over. Lewis came out of it with a cut on his head and wounded pride. Ellen was less fortunate. She got a badly injured foot, requiring medical attention. And so Lewis got her to a doctor. I haven't verified this, but I think the doctor's name was Donald Mason. I'm not sure, but I'm working on that.
I don't really come in the office.
He promised to pay the doctor. Did you get paid? And he got involved daily the next week in checking out on her condition. He also got the sedated Ellen home that evening at 4 a.m. This at Mrs. Dygert's insistence. But according to Flynn, the Dygerts were impressed with the way he handled the situation, and so did not require Ellen to check off that Hell's Point farm boy, soon to be teacher at Dewey School in Jamestown. Now, how am I going to end this? As you can see, it's been, just descriptive. I've been tattletaling on Lewis and Ellen for the most part. So I have no great grand conclusion. I thought about how to end it over and over, and this is what I decided. I think what I'll do is simply recite for your interest the first names of the Steuben County teenagers who surfaced in the letters. Just let you hear them one more time. Bess, Paul, Irma, Lee, Elsie, Guy, Addie, Ford, Nettie, Hugh, Myrtle, Harvey, Alice, Zeke, Viola, Dean, Laura, Hudson, Lala, my favorite, Burl, Mabel, Lowell, Mary, Earl, Florence, Roland, Lana, Charlie, Fern, Frank, Vera, Glenn, Ethel, Don, Emma, Morris, Ruth, Royal, Fanny, Bill, Lola, Wade, Lois, Edwin, Mildred, Leo, Opal, Orlo, and to conclude, Ellen and Lewis. Thank you very much for your kind attention. I've got a lot of help here because I know there's some people that know Lewis Hershey, so is this when we entertain questions, or we just go right to the goodies? Where's my help there, Mary? If you have any questions, I'd be glad to respond. Do anything you might want to ask? Do I have a question? Okay.
Did you enter the militia and then walk off in the army?
Yes, he enlisted in the militia in 1911. Weekly practices, dime a practice. They were activated and were sent to the Mexican border. We had some problems with the Mexican border. Brought back, and then World War I began. And after a time, the Guard was activated, but they were sent over there very late and actually did not engage in combat. And Lewis Hershey's assignment during World War I actually was the processing of American soldiers over there back home. He returned home in the summer of 1919, decided to stay in the regular army, and the rest is history, as they say. Mm-hmm.
How many children did they have?
They had 4 children, Lewis and Ellen. Yeah. We had a centennial birthday party for Lewis Hershey in 1993 at Tri-State, and all 4 children were back for that celebration. I don't know. I think they're still around, but I've not been keeping up on that.
I was engaged to one of the boys.
Is that right?
I was 5 years old. We were visiting them, and we were in California, and all of a sudden this kid was missing. And we were looking all over, and he was looking to buy a ring for me. And he was at the get-together.
What do you suppose he got that from, Ellen or Lewis?
The money? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, question there?
Yeah, is there any Hershey family present here tonight?
Pardon?
Is there any Hershey family present here tonight?
Any Hershey family present here tonight?
We're kind of related.
Or his mom's family, the Richardsons?
Somebody admits to being kinda related. Which side? Dirk, Dygert or Hershey side? Pardon?
That was my dad. Ford Fall.
Ford Fall. Here. One daughter of a person mentioned in the presentation is here. Anything to add?
I can't remember. I wish Mother was here so she could tell you.
Okay.
When they were going to service, I don't know whether Lewis was the principal or whether he was teaching. My father was teaching at the same school, and they would have to come into Angola to go for the service every week. And sometimes they would have a horse to ride or a sleigh, or sometimes they would walk, and sometimes they'd stay over, or sometimes they'd just walk back to the Flint area where they lived.
Yeah. Lewis Hershey taught 1 year at the elementary school, Dewey School, came back to Tri-State and was a student full-time for 3 years, earning 3 degrees, associate degree in science and a bachelor's, actually they called it a bachelor degree in science, it was a 2-year degree, and a bachelor's degree in pedagogy, teaching, and a Bachelor of Arts degree. And then he went to Flint High School. He came close to accepting a position as teaching mathematics here at Angola High School, but took the job at Flint where he was principal teacher for 2 years. For 2 years, and then that then led to activation of the Guard, and his dad wanted him to come back and be a farmer, but didn't work out. Yeah.
Where is he buried, Jim?
Ellen and Lewis are buried at Arlington National Cemetery in Washington, D.C. Yeah. Mhm. Thank you very much. Okay. Enjoy the goodies.